Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the most pressing issues of our modern era, child online protection. And we aren't just looking at this in the abstract. We're grounding our discussion in a very real-world context, specifically the recent speech delivered by the Department of Telecommunications Secretary, Shri Amit Agrawal. Speaking at the Digital BRICS Forum in Pune on August 20th, 2026, he highlighted the absolute urgent need for cybersecurity and trustworthy ICT, particularly when it comes to safeguarding our most vulnerable digital citizens. So let's dive right in and unpack the deep ethical challenges hidden beneath the surface of digital policy.
Now, right off the bat, this is the high-stakes central tension of our entire explainer: privacy versus security. It's a classic trade-off, right? But when you add children into the mix, the stakes completely skyrocket. I really want you to keep this specific question in the back of your mind as we go through the material today. This isn't just a theoretical puzzle. It's practically the ultimate test for civil servants, tech regulators, and policymakers today. How do we keep kids safe from real digital harms without stripping away their fundamental rights?
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll unpack the digital dilemma. Second, we'll open up our philosophical toolkit. Third, we'll dive into a case study challenge. Fourth, we'll be evaluating our options. And finally, we'll wrap up with a complete 10-marker answer breakdown.
Let's start with part 1, the digital dilemma, and really understanding the core concept here.
Okay, so let's look at the term protective paternalism. You're definitely going to want to remember this one. Basically, it happens when a state or an institution steps in to restrict someone's autonomy for their own good. In the case of children, a certain degree of paternalism is universally justified. Why? Well, because children simply don't have the capacity to make fully informed choices about complex online risks. However, if the state takes this too far, that protective paternalism morphs into overreach, severely infringing on a child's digital autonomy and privacy. The line between protection and oppression is razor thin. This breakdown brilliantly illustrates the cascading impact of the digital dilemma. At the individual level, the child faces the loss of their digital space and dignity. Moving down to the family level, a major jurisdictional battle emerges. Is it the state's job to monitor a child's device or the parents'? We call this the challenge of shared responsibility. And finally, at the state and tech company level, the question becomes one of accountability and proportionality. Exactly how much regulation is too much, and who ultimately moderates that content?
Moving on to part 2, the philosophical toolkit. We've got 3 brilliant thinkers to guide us through this.
First up is John Stuart Mill and his famous harm principle. Mill argued that you can only limit individual liberty to prevent harm to others. However, when we apply this to minors, the principle is slightly modified. Because children lack full capacity for informed consent, intervention to prevent self-harm and exploitation is absolutely justified. So the crucial takeaway here is that Mill does permit intervention, but he strictly limits it to preventing actual, tangible harm. Anything beyond that, that's a violation of liberty.
Next, we bring in Immanuel Kant and his concept of human dignity. Kant famously stated that every human being is an end in itself. People are not tools. In our modern digital context, this means a child cannot be used merely as a means to an end. They aren't just data points to be mined, nor are they part of some mass surveillance experiment. Scanning kids' data without their consent, especially for commercial use or blanket monitoring, directly violates their fundamental human dignity. They are inherently worthy of respect.
And finally, let's look at Amartya Sen and how his ideas build on our framework. Sen's capability approach teaches us that digital education and internet access actively build a child's capabilities. If the state imposes crippling restrictions all in the name of safety, they might actually be robbing children of vital growth, learning, and future opportunities. True ethical balance isn't found in just cutting off access entirely. It's found in providing safe access.
All right, part 3, the case study challenge. Let's look at AI, privacy, and policy in action.
I want you to picture this. Here's your situation. You are a joint secretary in the Department of Telecommunications. A new policy has just been proposed that requires all social media platforms to implement mandatory AI-based content monitoring on the accounts of all minors. And here's the kicker. This includes scanning all of their private messages to prevent exploitation. Just let the extreme nature of that proposal sink in for a second. We're talking about mass surveillance of private, everyday conversations just to find potential threats.
As you can imagine, you've got a wildly complex web of stakeholders pulling you in totally different directions here. Children and parents are caught right in the middle of this privacy versus safety debate. Tech companies are naturally complaining about implementation costs and asking for delays. Child rights organizations are strongly supporting the scanning, while digital rights organizations are protesting the mass surveillance and warning of future misuse. And legally, you're walking a tightrope. You have to balance Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty, which includes the right to privacy as established in the Puttaswamy judgment, against Article 39F, which is the state's directive principle to protect children from exploitation, enforced by laws like the POCSO Act. It's quite the balancing act.
This brings us to part 4, evaluating the options and finding the ethical path.
So, you've got two extreme options right off the bat. Option 1 is to fully implement the proposed policy, mandatory AI mass surveillance of all private messages. The obvious merit here is that it provides fast, immediate protection against exploitation. But the demerit? Well, as we just learned, it severely violates Kant's principle of human dignity by turning children into surveillance subjects, and it carries a massive risk of state misuse down the line. Option 2 is the exact opposite. Reject the policy entirely and maintain the status quo, which only moderates public content. The merit is that it's super easy and cheap for tech companies, but the glaring demerit is that it completely ignores the urgent, immediate need for child safety online. It basically abdicates the state's responsibility.
But wait, there is an option 3, the proportionate approach. This is really the ideal middle ground. First, we use targeted monitoring. So we monitor public-facing content, but private messages remain private unless there's a specific complaint or a court order. Second, we establish independent institutional oversight to ensure the state's power isn't misused. And third, we invest heavily in digital literacy. Instead of just restricting kids, we empower them and their parents to navigate the digital world safely. It maintains empathy, builds those crucial social skills, and completely avoids the dystopian trap of mass surveillance.
Now let's synthesize exactly why option 3 is ethically the best course of action. It beautifully ties together everything we've discussed today. It adheres to J.S. Mill's harm principle because the intervention is targeted and strictly limited to preventing actual harm rather than casting this massive invasive net. It respects Kant's human dignity by treating the child's private space with genuine respect, seeing them as individuals, not surveillance tools. And finally, by focusing on digital literacy, it actively builds Amartya Sen's capabilities, teaching children how to actually protect themselves long-term. It's balanced. Sure, it's a bit more difficult to implement, but ultimately it's the most sustainable path forward.
Finally, part 5. The 10-marker answer breakdown. Let's do a line-by-line analysis of a great response.
Clarify the ethical dilemma between security and privacy regarding child online protection. Let's see how a top-tier answer tackles this.
The answer kicks off with a punch. Protecting children from online exploitation is a state duty, but excessive surveillance violates privacy and dignity. What makes this so incredibly effective is that it doesn't waste any time. It immediately establishes the core conflict, the state's directive duty to protect versus the individual's fundamental right to privacy and dignity. You're telling the grader right away that you completely grasp the macro-level tension.
Then, check out this next line moving into the justification phase. Per J.S. Mill's harm principle, intervention must be strictly limited to preventing actual harm, avoiding overreach. Notice how the writer drops a specific philosophical keyword, the harm principle, early in the paragraph. This is absolutely crucial for GS4. You aren't just giving an opinion. You're anchoring your argument in established ethical frameworks. It shows real intellectual depth.
Next, the writer does something super clever. As noted at the BRICS Digital Forum, in Kant's theory, children are worthy of respect, not mere tools of surveillance. This brilliantly illustrates how to blend current affairs with static theory. The writer ties the August 2026 BRICS Digital Forum, specifically the DOT Secretary's remarks on India's approach to child protection, directly to Immanuel Kant's theory of human dignity. It shows the grader that you understand exactly how ancient philosophy applies to modern tech diplomacy.
And we wrap it up with a strong conclusion. True protection is proportionate, balancing targeted intervention, digital literacy, and institutional oversight. This works perfectly because it refuses to just get stuck in the dilemma itself. A good administrator doesn't just admire a problem, they solve it. This conclusion provides an actionable, balanced, and proportionate solution, hitting those key pillars of targeted intervention, literacy, and oversight, rather than settling for mass surveillance.
So, we've covered a ton of ground today, from protective paternalism all the way to the capability approach. I want to leave you with this final, provocative practice question. Based on everything you've just learned, how would you answer this in 3 to 4 lines? Is it morally justifiable to sacrifice a portion of privacy for children's online safety? Would you personally sacrifice privacy for safety? And if so, exactly how much? Take some time to formulate your own answer.
Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and I hope this provided you with a crystal clear framework for navigating the digital dilemma.